Goeiedag beste kijkers. Op dit moment heb ik een klein papiertje voor me en dat gaat over biosfeer 2. Ik weet niet of u het zich nog kunt herinneren. In de 90e jaren zijn er in Amerika een aantal biosfeers gemaakt. Biosfeer 1 en biosfeer 2. Waarin 8 researchers zich hebben teruggetrokken om te kijken hoe het leven op aarde zou kunnen zijn. Als wij in geschreven over deze ecological engineering, noemen ze het. En u kunt dat even bekijken. En vandaag hebben wij in de studio twee van de researchers hier. Foundation. Ik ga ze even aan u voorstellen. We doen het gesprek in Engels. Ze komen uit Amerika en Mark komt uit België. We gaan eens praten met ze over hoe dit project is ontstaan en wat het project eigenlijk inhield. Welkom in de studio.
Thank you.
Abigail Alling is sitting next to me and Mark Thillo. Biosphere 1 and 2. Who wants to take the lead? How did it start? Why is there Biosphere 1 and why is there Biosphere 2?
Well, Biosphere 1 is the Earth's biosphere. That's the living entity, the rocks, the soils, the plants, the atmosphere of our biosphere. And Biosphere 2 was a miniature world under glass. It was 3.15 acres, designed to be a global laboratory for ecological studies of the planet, of the biosphere. So it was called Biosphere 2.
Okay. Okay. Here we are, Biosphere 2. What was your experience, Mark? You were you took part of the technical...
Yes, I was in charge of the technical systems.
Yeah.
And so because we had a totally enclosed system, we needed to control our temperature, our atmosphere. Mm-hmm. We actually had to regenerate our atmosphere. We had a small little ocean in there that had its own wave systems mm-hmm. through a vacuum chamber. There was 120 pumps in there cycling 200,000 gallons of fresh water, mm-hmm. 1 million gallons of salt water. So all those processes that normally happen in Biosphere 1 naturally, right. we mimicked to help the 3,200 species to flourish. We had a rainforest, a desert, mm-hmm. savanna, the ocean, and a little city, because it was also a biome where 8 people lived, and we had a big kitchen in there with dining room. We had a library.
Yeah. So, but what was the context of it? I mean, Biosphere 2 and 1 have been erased to reserve or preserve species on this earth, or how did this whole process came about?
Well, one of the original ideas that sort of pioneered Biosphere 2 was an idea of ecotechnics, and in fact the Institute of Ecotechnics in London was very on the forefront of this, advising on how to do Biosphere 2. The idea of ecotechnics is to bring together ecology and technology, and right. at a time on our planet when technology is with a very definite course, and in some cases, often in cases, it's in the destruction of ecology. Right. And at the same time, ecology is something we can never go back to the Garden of Eden. So this idea was to bring together these two forces of ecology and technology mm-hmm. in a new way, in a harmonious way, where technology would be harnessed for the use of ecology, of good living, of recycling air, of wastewater, of water, of growing agriculture, of growing foods without chemicals and pesticides, of living in an international team of people in a harmonious way that really set a direction for our millennium, really.
Right, right.
That could be applied directly back to planet Earth, and at the same time study these cycles and how does a complex ecological system really work, mm-hmm. which before Biosphere 2 there is never a laboratory so tightly sealed that one could do such studies.
Right. So what came out of this? I mean, after all this research, you spent 2 years in captivity, so to say. So what were the findings? I mean, what were your findings?
Well, there was many. First of all, that we proved the concept that one can make a closed system, yeah. soil-based system. We grew, in the 2 years, we grew 80% of our food. The next crew grew the full 100%. We had an agriculture system.
You did it yourself. You grew
Yes,
the food
the
yourself.
8 people inside.
So
yeah.
the whole idea was that you had to. How did you do it with meat, for example? You grew your own food. Did you had animals inside?
Oh yes, we had goats and chickens. And so also for milk and eggs. But the agriculture system was so small. It had 20,000 square feet for 8 people. It was 50% more efficient than any agriculture system in the world, which is also in this book, the actual numbers of our harvests.
Yeah.
We had to recycle all of our own water. So the water we started with in the beginning of the 2 years was still that same water cycling through as we used it to drink our cup of coffee. It would go in through the agriculture. It would end up in the fog desert. So the water kept recycling, was very successful. And we did not pollute our atmosphere. Our atmosphere was still breathable. And the only thing an interesting thing that happened, because the system was so closed.
There were no cars in there. Huh?
There were no cars. Not then.
Then
anyway.
it was easy.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the oxygen dropped because there was a process called CO2 carbonization.
Yeah.
The CO2 was sequestered in the concrete.
Yeah.
And so the oxygen was tied up, therefore we let it drop to 14.2% just to see what would happen. And then of course in 14 months we put the oxygen back to 19%.
So how did you cope with that? The oxygen dropping so rapidly. I mean, there was no replacement. You didn't fill it up to 100%, so to say. I mean, so how did you cope with that?
Well, it is. It's almost like climbing mountains. When you get up there at 15,000 feet, you get short of breath. Some people get headaches, and it's very different individual who has problems or not. But it always feels like you're climbing those last 100 feet of a mountain. So as you walk up the stairs, but still, it was.
But was that also a problem because there was not enough green circulation? There was not enough. I mean, because the oxygen is being helped by the green and the ocean also, isn't it? I mean, we get oxygen from the ocean also.
In fact, the plants were producing the oxygen to breathe. That wasn't the problem at all. But it became an intense study of interest because humans can live at lower levels of oxygen. Right now, I'm breathing 21% oxygen.
Yeah.
And what our study showed that at least down to 17 or even maybe 16%, humans can function very rigorously and well. So that means submarines can operate at lower level oxygen. It means space stations can. It means the shuttle can. So we had participants from these different industries also coming to the biosphere to find out about it because they were fascinated that we were living as if we were on a high mountain of, let's say, Tibet, Lhasa, like people do there, and operating well, which means that we can also really change how we live elsewhere on this planet.
Right.
It really opened up the whole atmosphere. Studies opened up whole avenues of new sort of interest in how we live and what we're breathing. For example, if you get in a subway of London or Amsterdam, you will be breathing very high levels of carbon dioxide, and yet the average person isn't aware of this. But atmospheres change dramatically depending where you are on the Earth.
They're like little eco niches within certain environments. Like say in the studio, for example, we really don't have any idea, but there is quite a change to say outside or anywhere else.
So to come back on the food situation, because I'm quite interested, how did you nourish yourself? You had to grow your own vegetables, you had to kill your own animals, or did you?
Yes. Okay. And most of our staples were bananas. We had bananas every day, papayas, a lot of sweet potatoes. Then, of course, all the vegetables.
They were growing well.
They were growing those were growing, and red beets, they were growing really well, yes. Okay. And then, of course, we had tomatoes and lettuce and onions and rice, wheat. For our occasional bread. In the tropical agriculture, we also had coffee, But the coffee, everything was still small because it was the beginning of the system. It was designed for 100 years.
Yeah.
So our coffee trees, we had about, 48 cups of coffee in the 2 years' time.
Oh, right.
So, which was...
Okay. So we've got a real treat. Huh?
Yeah,
Yes,
put a smile on everybody's face that day, that
Here
morning.
we come with the coffee again.
Yes.
It was like a farm. Exactly, living on a farm where you had to, but the only difference was, in that regard, was everything was measured and recyclable. So there was no away. You knew where your water went to and what was in it and how to bring it back. You knew what was in your compost and how to recycle it at the right time. And there was all the time, the phasing and the spatial changes was extremely important. And so we were farmers, yet at the same time we were living in a very futuristic way of measuring in detail so many things and then trying to balance it in a way or recycle it correctly in a way. Was bringing together these two forces in a new way.
So now you're sitting there with 8 people. I mean, everybody has, it was in a way some luxury because everybody had his own space and his own bedroom, and it was not like you were put together and you had to deal with each other the whole day through. But you go in with 8 people, you know each other reasonably well because I heard you've been working on this project for quite some time before you went in. So what kind of conflicts did you encounter by living and working on that level with each other?
Well, there was many, and in many ways they were not different than any other conflicts you would get in, let's say, an office or a company situation, except that it was so intensified because we weren't the only ones looking at it. There was, from the outside, there was a lot of people looking at it too, not with camera, but more as an interest. But to me, it was fascinating because it was sort of a 2-year time. I had a time to study myself as well as everybody else. How do I work with social relationships and
Right. So what did came out? What came out for you? I mean, can you open up a little bit to that?
Yeah. Well, actually, really,
what were your conflicts?
My conflicts was that what I really realized, I think, is that you can't really change anybody else. How much you want another person to change, it will not happen. So the only thing is, I make that change, or I decide I will live with it. And that's really the only thing. But which was very profound. I mean, it's easy to say, but biosphere 2 sort of...
but they were all reasonable people in that sense. I mean, there was not a murderer with it, which, for example, you did not have to be afraid that there was some killer in there whom you really had to... I mean, there were a physical killer, or maybe that kind of feelings came up or out, I don't know, but...
Yeah.
So you came to the conclusion you can't change anybody. Okay, but how did you cope with it? How did you cope with the fact that you can't change someone? What happened?
Well, so then the change is within myself. I mean, okay,
your attitude.
Yes, my attitude and how I would live with that, which is not easy. I mean, to accept that. I mean, it's not, but still.
Right.
And conflict is, and the other thing is, you can't get away from conflict. Conflict is part of that humanity. So I guess I accepted that. Where before, maybe biosphere 2, I was still thinking very naively, it's not part of me. It's not part of me or part of you, but it is.
Were there counselors inside also?
Were there what?
Be any way of some conflict resolution?
There was counselors on the outside because it was a scientific scrutinized project, and so we went through a series of tests on the outside to make sure that it wasn't just subjective that we're all well. We were in fact all well. And but I think again to the conflict that this was, for me, the insight was, it was a major insight on struggles that occur inside biosphere 2 or outside, that they're based on value, on really value decisions. And in that regard, it was almost microscoped in Biosphere 2 what those values are, but they're very basic, such as do you want to focus on a total system or a biosphere, or do you want to focus on a very single a point of research? And these are things that go on our own society, and yet in Biosphere 2 they became and very important. And so the struggles were based from really that point.
For you at that point.
Definitely.
I mean, yeah.
And a way to try and work around that is something that we're working on right now, Mark and I, with a ship, because this was the center, the area of Biosphere 2 that was the most challenging, was the people side of it and how people work together. So we're working with a ship now to try and bring in different cultures to see how people can work just not on a task professionally, but also socially. And the more different cultures that we bring together on the ship, the easier it is. And I think that's the most interesting thing that's happened in the past few years since Biosphere 2, is that cultural diversity is really a way to heal or to harmonize impasses.
But there were different nationalities in Biosphere 2, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, so you had to already work with that cultural differences.
Yes, and that's true. We had 3 different nationalities, and we had 4 men and 4 women, and we had vastly different ages, from 30 to 65. And that played a very important role, and extremely, that was really what showed also the insight into how the planetary work that I think all of us are really looking at now is this cultural exchange and how to be a planetary citizen.
Right.
And if it had been more diverse, it would have been easier. But there were still many more Americans than the Belgian representative, Mark, or the British representatives.
Right.
If we had even less Americans and more of, let's say, an Asian or a Japanese or a Chinese, but something vastly different, it would have made a big difference.
Yeah, it would confront it. At least it had confronted you as an American much more with your own cultural background.
Yes.
You know, now you are still in a dominating position. So
yes, exactly.
Taking the rights towards yourself.
Yes.
And that idea of complexity, like in the species, we had over 3,000 different species in there.
Which ranged from insects,
from tropical insects to microbes, all the way to plants and animals. There were also the small, tiny galagos in there.
I don't know what these are.
It's the little monkeys. Yeah, small. Yeah. And there was a snake in there. There was a tortoise in there, or 2. Usually, always in sets.
It's like the ship of Ark, or
yeah.
Well, if you think about it, I guess the simplest way to think about Biosphere 2 in that experiment is for 2 years, 8 people left this world.
Yeah.
And it's just that simple, in that we were breathing a different atmosphere, we were drinking very different water that had been recycled in certain ways, and we were eating food grown totally organically without any chemicals or pesticides. We didn't have sugar. We didn't have wine or beer. We didn't have a lot of fat and a lot of cakes, and
we made some banana wine when there was plenty. And also the system was so young that over years you would create a surplus, which we have right now in many places.
Did you were you notified yourself, like how to make your food, how to, for example, the recipes, or did you really started to dig into that? I mean,
what kind of
you dug into it?
Yeah. And a cookbook. Actually, Sally Silverstone, who was in charge of food systems, did write a cookbook with all the ingredients.
Oh, great!
We would send out the recipes outside, and they would say, no, this can't be in the cookbook, or it was hard for them to, because we were not using butter or things like that, which sometimes makes it hard to.
Yeah.
You had to be very, very creative and start relying on sweet potatoes and bananas for the sweeteners, and I mean, a completely different way of life. That was
very purifying.
Very.
I might feel so. Very purifying.
Well, across the board, the doctor said we were more healthy when we came out than when we went in. So
Or cholesterol levels dropped. Blood pressure.
So were you all friends? Were there couples into it? Were they all authentic, or were they all individuals, females and males? I mean, how did that whole attraction and magnifying part of plus and minus went on? I mean, were there couples? Were there all loose friends? Or how did it go? How did you work with that?
Well, yeah. So, well, there was eight individuals in there, of course, but yeah, couples. In fact, one couple got married right after.
Oh,
I think about 6 months. Tabor and Jane get married.
They formed a couple during the 2 years.
And yes, and many lasting friendships, like Gay and myself.
Right. Well, that much you're so close to each other. I mean, so you would eat together every day. You would have your tasks to do.
That was interesting with eating together, because we had a set up like a French cafe with different tables, and people could take their food to the we had a balcony overlooking the agriculture.
Yeah.
But for some reason, everybody was always attracted, although whatever conflicts were happening, to come around this table at
dinner time.
At the end of the day, at dinner time. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And of course, breakfast was always together, because we would have our meeting there and look at the priorities of the day, see what needed to be done to keep our system going. But it was interesting that everybody always showed up for dinner, just to. There was a definite attraction.
To, at least with 8, you have to have some company.
Yeah.
So how much time did you work? I mean, how much sleep did you get?
We got a fair amount. We basically worked at least an 8-hour day, and the working involved anywhere from being farmers to being scientists and looking at what's in your atmosphere, and then what you might have to do about it in order to change it slightly, or to cooking, to communicating with the outside world. And then we also had movies and books. We had a library, and we had telephone and email and fax and meetings. We could meet at the Glass and exchange. So it was quite a well-rounded, healthy life, and we slept at least 8 hours a day, and then get up early and carry on.
So, but now the whole thing, I mean, this was a project set up for 100 years, I just heard.
Yes.
So it stopped after 2 years. I mean, the purpose was to go in for 2 years. That was the commitment, or the commitment was longer, 5 years, 4 years?
No, it was a 2-year commitment.
It was a 2-year commitment.
But then we had a 5-month transition that we kept closed and put a new crew in after 5 months with 7 people.
Okay.
And they stayed in for about 6 months. It wasn't a true closure anymore, but then Columbia University took over research, and what they really did, the first thing they did was then take the people out, take the agriculture out, the most efficient agriculture system in the world, use pesticides, petrochemical pesticides, put in a car where you said we didn't have a car inside. So it they totally changed the direction back to their line of research.
But what was actually their research? I mean, where were they getting at then? I mean, you guys came from actually a natural-based agriculture way of living, while they take over and put in pesticide. I don't understand. I mean, suddenly, what were their objectives? I mean, you guys were trying to find some alternatives.
A biospheric approach. We were using,
trying to find alternatives. And what were they trying to do?
Our approach was very definitely really addressing a taboo, which I think is really a planetary taboo of the human is not a part of the biosphere, or not part of the environment. And so oftentimes academics particularly will take the human out of the equation and just not even look at it. So we were really looking at the whole biosphere with the technology, with the humanity force included, as well as the life involved with it. Columbia has an approach much more traditional, classic, in that they're looking at biogeochemical cycling. How does things cycle, molecules cycle, global warming, very specific points of issue that they want to address. So it's a completely different viewpoint. It goes back to the values of what I was saying was a classic a battle inside the biosphere, inside and outside, was whether or not you want to address something from a biospheric view, or whether you just want to not and go to something very specific, when in fact both can go hand in hand, and that's naturally the way it should occur. But it tends to fracture out where only one view is taken. And what we were really trying to do was to do it all. and to bring it all both views together in a new way.
So you 8 people, some people went to Columbia University, got stuck there, and you took another approach. I mean, there were some very valuable projects in Biosphere 2. So what did you do with that project? I mean, what is left over? What is actually being practicized at this particular moment with all the knowledge you have gained over those 2 years?
Yeah. Well, Biosphere 2 was only possible because of Institute of Ecotechnics, who did all the science for Biosphere 2, has many projects around the world, like a savanna in Western Australia, doing research on savannas. That's where the idea of a savanna. We have an ocean-going ship looking now at coral reefs, which was right now is been done for 5 years. We found out, as we developed a technique to looking at health using video camera in the ocean of Biosphere 2, looking at the coral reef. We wanted to apply that to Biosphere 1, the Earth, but found out nobody really knows exactly where the reef is, how much reef there is. So our first task we set out to do is map that coral reef of the planet. And so our ship, the Heraclitus, is going around and taking transects of reef, looking at their health and vitality. We're also taking very small samples to look at climate changes and temperature. We take temperature data.
So what you do is
really
making an inventory. Are you making an inventory of the global condition at this particular moment? Is that what's still going on? It's like an inventory of...
Well, what we found with Biosphere 2 was that the coral reef was the most sensitive part, and that would show immediately any interaction with the atmosphere.
Right.
So therefore, then we found out that Biosphere 1 coral reefs they're not very studied. In fact, like I said, we don't know where they are. So yes, to start with an inventory, but at the same time look at their condition and their health.
And what is the antidote? I mean, looking at their condition and their health. I mean, so what is it now in your experience? What have you been learned to heal, to harmonize? Because it's been getting pretty out of harmony. We all know that. So what are we going to do now to harmonize? What is the technical or inventory you have made over all those years to apply this?
I think the approach, the only possible approach, and one that we're trying to pioneer, is to put information out, just like this TV channel. And that in that way is the only chance to try and get enough people even to see there's a problem. So we're working with an international team of people, one, to provide a seamanship program where students from all over the world, anywhere, can come to our ship and join a 9-month program there and learn about the coral reefs, learn about how to assess their health and vitality, how to live on a ship at sea, how to live with other people. And at the same time, so that's the local level, at the same time we're working with some scientists internationally to design a sensor that we're hoping to be put up on a space station or on a satellite in the near future, which could actually see coral reefs from space, and so you get a planetary view. And this comes back to the biosphere, of the necessity to see coral reefs from a global viewpoint. One, to know where they are, and then two, to find out, well, what is happening to coral reefs, because we really have no idea. Only by a few observations. What is their
influence? What is the influence of a coral reef on the biosphere?
In particular, we think one main influence is simply the fact that they're like an indicator biome. They're the area of the world that we saw in Biosphere 2, which responds instantly. So if the coral reef is healthy, we have the indicator of the ocean around it. If it's not healthy, that's an indication that the ocean around it is not well. So one, it's definitely a signpost. It's a main way to address health issues. And the second and third and fourth could be anywhere from an oxygen generator, a carbon dioxide sink, to pharmaceuticals,
It's
to
a very
ethnobotany.
diverse. The amount of species in a coral reef also again have not been counted yet.
But wait a minute. I mean, what I find interesting in this, I mean, I really must stretch this a little bit. I mean, so we look at the coral reefs, and they are an indicator of how healthy the ocean is and how healthy actually the planet is. Because if the ocean is unhealthy, we also have the indication that our planet is not very healthy. And so we have this kind of layer upon layer. But we look around and we will see already, I mean, you went into Biosphere 2, you came out healthier than when you went in.
That's true.
So there is the indication already
Of course.
that the health, you know, the way you have been living in Biosphere 2, the purity, I might say, of living somehow made you much healthier. So the indication is already there. What is health and what is not healthy?
Yes, but not on a day-by-day basis. And it's one step farther. It's like if there's trouble, you can immediately see it, and then you can try to source where the trouble originated from. And right now we're guessing a lot. And we're guessing because we don't even know enough about our own planet to understand how it functions as a biosphere. And the coral reefs are definitely
How the
important
interactions
in that, yes,
really are.
and that what is the source of a problem and where is it coming from in order to really act intelligently, which I think is the task of humanity for the millennium, is to become an intelligent co-creator with this biosphere entity. Then we need the information. And that goes back to then trying to even know where they are. What are coral reefs? What are they doing? And it's just a small piece of the big puzzle.
Right.
It's not the answer to everything.
Okay. No, I know what you're saying.
How do you manage
We're
them?
doing our best. We're trying to find the answers in interaction. So what do you say?
Yeah, it's like a managing tool, how to manage them. For example, in Indonesia, there's a lot of dynamiting.
Yeah.
And there's people coming in, dynamiting reef, harvest the fish, and the fishing villages on the outside. That's the end of their
Total ignorance.
Yeah. So by also we're at the same time pioneering. It's not just our ship going around. We're also wanting a satellite that could monitor those reefs and give immediate feedback to the people really out there.
But how do you make them this consciousness? I mean, you're putting dynamite in and blowing. I mean, this is a point where you come. I mean, is that our task? We know. I mean, this is not a good thing to put dynamite in. You can kind of intelligently think about this. So how do you stretch that to someone who lives on this island and says, well, I need to get my fish. I don't care how I get it, but I'm just gonna get it. How do you that step? I mean, I know as a ship, because you're also trying to. How do you live with people? How do you communicate with each other? How do you get into real conflict resolving? Because that's also part of it. How do we all get the piece of the pie? Because that's what we want. He needs his fish, which is obvious, and we know it's not good how he gets his fish. So what is the alternative? So
and to show those alternatives, and that's why the internet is really interesting, because this information can go out, is to really educate people that if you blast once, that's the end of your fish for 50, 60, maybe 100 years. While otherwise, if you maintain the reef, you have a steady income of fish, and of course, it isn't your one-time big harvest.
Right. So I think that's a good one you say. It's not a one-time big harvest. So the learning process of you don't have to get it all at once, but if you be intelligent, you can stretch it a lot longer. I think you have it on all levels. I mean, in business too. You see the prices people nowadays charge for consulting or whatever they do. It's outrageous. It's like everybody wants to have it once. I want to have that million in one time, so then I don't have to do anything anymore. It's a kind of mentality. While if you ask a little bit, just reasonable, so we can all sustain ourselves, we can have a steady economy, and we all have
if we manage our planet and our resources, there's no way say you can't use a resource. You can use the resource, but make it so where it doesn't destroy your wealth within it, because it really is. And that's the other thing I learned out of Biosphere 2 is how to lead a wealthy life. And wealth became of the things we grew, the things we produced, and with our own resources. Right. And that was so that there's big difference between wealth and, say, richness, or basically meaning money. There's a big, you know, you could have $1 million in the bank, but live very unwealthy.
Very poor.
Very poorly, right. Yes. And
so how is the backup? How is the support you people having? I mean, to me it sounds very intelligently and very with a lot of integrity, and you know, that's how it feels to me. But what is the backup in the outside world? How do you get your money? How is the support going on here? Which parties are willing? Greenpeace, are they willing to support? I mean, who is supporting this?
We are a nonprofit, which means that everybody is a volunteer, and it's a constant source of help. We need help. And we ask help from individuals, from corporations and in-kind donations. To keep a ship at sea, we're probably one of the few people in the world able to do it at about $300 a day, which is incredibly low. But that's a constant cash we need. And so we're always out there looking, trying to get support.
But there is support out there, and especially we've been at ports like in Hurghada in Egypt, in Oman, India, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Seychelles, Sumatra, all through Indonesia, Kenya, and almost in every port we have gotten support where we could stay, dock fees would be waived, little things like that, right. But that are helpful because we have to, otherwise you would have to come up with the cash. Right. So that in that respect there is a lot of people backing, there's a lot of individuals.
Our intent in this next year is to put on our homepage, www.pcrf.org, our data.
Yeah, and I will write that in on the screen. Yeah.
Great, and our visual imaging. What we want to do is make it a center for the world, where the ship is the eyes of the sea, and puts it up for people anywhere to have access to. That on a local scale we think we can do this year. It's just a matter of getting it right so we can get everything that we collect online. But then to expand that in the next few years, so then with the satellite imaging, if we get to that point, then it becomes also a global look. And we feel that if we succeed in this, then the eyes of the ocean are the world's eyes, and that's a step in the right direction. It's, again, much like what you're trying with your TV station to do here, is to get information available.
Right.
And so that's where we're hoping to go with this. And have it as a real experiment whereby then it will be picked up for other things, rainforests, vanishing cultures, all the numerous problems that we face, that it would be an example for how this can be utilized for the world in many areas.
So a lot to be learned for all of us still.
Oh, I definitely think so, yeah.
Always.
Yeah. A lot to be learned, so there needs to be openness to explore this. Okay, thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
We know how much it matters. 2.5 trillion dry tons at present, with an annual productivity of 150 to 200 million tons, including 18 million tons of human flesh, depositing an annual increase of 10 million tons to geological deposits, coal, oil, limestones. Science shows we are ephemera, plucking subtlest inner octaves of structure from superstrings of galaxies anchored in a void of infinite potential.